Hello and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. This week we're sharing with you a conversation that our crime and public safety reporter Ivy Secrest had with some local law enforcement and fire department officials about their concerns with potential cuts to property taxes, which would directly impact how much money they receive and their ability to fund their departments. And before we get to that conversation, I'll say be sure to stick around. At the end of the podcast, we'll bring you a roundup of upcoming events in Cheyenne and Laramie County and a recap of some of our headlines over the past week. But now, here's Ivy.
I'm here today with two leaders in local law enforcement, Brian Kozak with the Laramie County Sheriff's Office and Jason Caughey with the Laramie County Fire Authority, here to talk about Senate File 69, homeowner property tax exemption, which would cut property taxes by 50% for single-family homes over the next 2 years. What a lot of our viewers and listeners might not know is that property taxes pretty directly impact funding for public safety, such as sheriffs and our fire responders. And I think you guys have had a lot of problems recently looking at this big of a cut and what that's going to mean for your individual departments. You both have gone out on social media and talked about how you're going to have to see reductions in staff, which directly correlates to how quickly you can get to community members, how quickly you can help them in pretty time-sensitive situations. So if you guys could walk me a little bit through what this means for your departments, I think that would be really helpful.
All right, so I can tell you that the county government gets about 44% of their revenue from property tax. So looking at last year's data in 2024, if this bill went into effect, then the county would actually have to reduce their total budget by $7.6 million. And so that equates to about 13% of the county budget, which normally probably would be spread amongst all the departments. So I would have to reduce my budget by 13%. And that, I have a $30 million budget because I have to manage a jail. It's the largest jail in Wyoming. I have to run court security, do civil process and service for all the courts in Laramie County, and also patrol operations and detective services as well. So we have a lot of responsibility. And so that would mean I would have to actually cut my budget about $3.9 million, which could equate to roughly 35 jobs that I would have to cut.
Okay, and previously you guys thought it was only going to be about $2 million and it was going to be about 25 jobs. What has changed? You just reevaluated since then?
Yeah, so initially I was pretty conservative in my estimate, and then since then the commissioners asked the finance department to put up some more accurate numbers, and so what I'm giving you now is probably more accurate than what I came up. And I wanted to be very conservative and not overestimate, so that's why I came up with about $2 million, but actually it's going to be almost $4 million that I'll have to cut.
Okay. And Jason, what does that mean for fire?
You know, for all of the districts in the county, all the fire districts in the county, they are based off of a special district's mill levy. That special district's mill collects 3 mills, which is 3 cents for every $1,000 property value, which equates to, for a $500,000 house, approximately $150 that our citizens pay for emergency medical care and fire protection for their properties. For us, as Laramie County Fire Authority, it impacts us immediately. It takes us from a $1.9 million budget to a $1 million budget overnight. And that essentially takes us back to prior to 2010 budget numbers. 2010 expenses aren't real anymore, right? So everything's gone up over the last 15 years. That budget would not provide the services that our citizens have been asking us to provide over the last 15 years. So it's about a 25% reduction in our full-time staffing. We have 12 full-time people. We're going to lose 25% of them potentially unless we can realign them and get revenue from someplace else. It reduces our college program. We have 18 college students that stay in our stations, that go to school, that respond to calls. It's going to cut that program in half to 9 college students, and then it's going to impact the service. We don't know to what extent yet, but most likely we're going to have to reduce call volume, which is how do we cut out service to our community and still get funded or still provide the core service that we need, which is responding to medical calls that are significant, responding to wildland fires, responding to structure fires, responding to motor vehicle accidents. Someplace has to give there. Call volume in the last 15 years is quadrupled, and that's just our service needs from our community. So it's significant, the impact to the local county fire departments.
Yeah. Also, I might add that that's on top of the additional cuts that we have to make because of the bills that passed last legislative session. And so we're still waiting to see how that's going to impact us. But finance is estimating for the county that's another $5 to $6 million that we'll have to cut. So that's in addition to what I just gave you.
So with these major cuts that are coming down the line, I know you've got a really active community on Facebook. You both have gone out to the public using social media just to discuss what this bill means, what that means for people's services. And you've gotten a lot of negative pushback, people very frustrated that you wouldn't support their property tax cuts, seeing property taxes as theft, and really encouraging you guys to look at the unnecessary, quote unquote, budget items that you could cut instead of personnel. I know we've talked about it previously, but it sounds like you can't necessarily cut an exorbitant uniform budget or whatever random project that might be taking up that much just because of the amount of your budget that you're losing here. So can you explain a little bit why it has to be personnel?
Well, I'll start with it. And obviously, we're heavily dependent on volunteers. And across the country and also in Wyoming, last year's legislation addressed the lack of volunteers in the fire service, providing additional programs. And now here we are, we have 120 volunteers. Those programs are going to be dwindled away and reduced because of the funding mechanism. So there's the first part. The second part is we're already at a bare bones minimum. When we compare our numbers to the other parts of the country, we're significantly less funded than any place else. We do a lot with a little, and that's been the motto. We respect the taxpayers' cuts. We're both taxpayers in Laramie County. We pay those taxes. Our volunteers that provide service to their community, last month alone, they donated 1,600 hours of volunteer time. Well, those folks are volunteering and also paying property taxes. Without the support of those property taxes, we don't have the equipment to keep them safe. We don't have the training to keep them safe. And that results in lessening the service to our community. And so it's beyond just staffing piece, right? It's also all the other components that impact how we serve our community that need to be reduced out of that.
For the sheriff's office, 89% of my budget goes to personnel costs. So that's paying salary, benefits, and insurance for the people that work for the sheriff's office. So the remaining 11% are those things that we have to purchase to run the jail and have cops on the street. So those are things like cars, uniform, equipment. But what's the most expensive for us in that 11% is our medical contract, which is almost $4 million a year to have nursing, doctors, mental health counselors, and so forth in the jail so we can prevent suicide. We can take care of the medical issues before someone dies in our jail. And, of course, if it goes that far, then, of course, we're looking at a lot of a risk for the county, which the taxpayers would have to pay the state of Wyoming. So we're trying to be preventative in what we're doing with those medical services. So I don't have any room to my plan is to actually cut the medical services down and only have nurses in the daytime, cut down some of the mental health counseling. But I can only take that so far. So the only other place that I can pull from are going to be personnel expenses, and that's going to be salary by eliminating positions that I feel are not as essential as some of the other things. So, for example, we'll still have deputies on the street going to calls. It might be a little bit less than what we have now, but we'll still have deputies in the jail for security purposes, and we'll still be doing process serving for the court and court security. But all those things will be reduced. Some of the things I'll have to eliminate completely. is at our juvenile services center. So we run a juvenile detention center for the county. We have a crisis center in that facility, so that youth that are not necessarily, we're trying to keep them out of jail. We're trying to keep kids from getting arrested. And so we have this crisis center where they're not actually being detained, but it's a place that parents can bring kids, police officers can bring kids that are really on the verge of getting in trouble, or maybe they just need to get out of their home for a while. Maybe they're in a dangerous situation. Maybe they've been a victim of a molestation, and we just need to pull them out of the home for a while. So I'm going to have to cut that department completely because it's not something I have to do. That's more of a responsibility for the state under Department of Family Services to manage that. But just some time back, the taxpayers in Laramie County felt it was important to have, and the sheriff stepped up and brought that center on board. But that's one of the things we'll have to probably eliminate.
So a lot of the things on your end, Kozak, sound a lot like really positive things that have helped you guys kind of get this lower crime rate that you're kind of assessing in this year's data. But not necessarily things that if you don't have, you'll be no longer within your legal obligations to the community. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so we're going to have to focus on what our legal responsibility is, and unfortunately eliminate those things that aren't necessarily required. And you brought up a good point. I mean, the sheriff's office, with our proactive programs that we had, we lowered burglaries, a staggering 61% from 2021, and auto theft to 73% from 2021. So, crime is really low in the unincorporated parts of the county. And some of those proactive things like the neighborhood night out stuff, we won't have the resources or the budget to do those things in the future. Another thing is looking at our school resource. We just started that this last year, our school resource deputies in the high schools in the unincorporated areas of the county. And so the county commissioners brought that on, gave me 4 positions for that. A lot of people were saying, well, that's grant funded. No, it's not. It's completely funded by property tax. And so one of the things, a lot of places will have the school district pay for that program, but we decided to fund it ourselves under the sheriff's office because it comes from the same source. So school and the sheriff's office all comes from property taxes. So we were like, why are we going to make the school district pay? It comes from the same taxpayer. So we just went ahead and funded that, but that's something that we'll have to eliminate as well because it's not essential.
I know Jason mentioned call time or call volume and response times. What does that mean for if I'm a taxpayer and I own property in Laramie County, and my house is on fire? What does that mean for response time for me?
Absolutely. So first off, on a fire, structure fires, the size of the fire doubles every minute. And so every minute that we are delayed in responding enhances and creates a more devastating event for that property owner. Likewise, you've heard of the golden hour in EMS and medical service. Those first minutes of a significant medical emergency without interventions from a trained EMT or paramedic have a drastic impact on the long-term outcome of that event. So in this case, with this proposal from the property tax reduction, we're going to have to reduce what stations we have staffed. And by doing that, we then further the distance that we have to drive or respond to the citizen's home, which then prolongs how long we can get there. That impacts the size of the event and the significance of the event immediately. We strategically place fire stations based off of national standards and locations based off of where our residents are. And by having to draw back to our one station instead of being in 3 locations, maybe full-time, now we have to travel that same distance. So those impacts on response times and on call volume is going to be significant for the taxpayer. They're going to stand there like we did 25 years ago and going, where's the fire department? That was the model then. And we've been able over the last few decades to improve that based off the need of our community. So
what you're saying, Chief, is when seconds count, you'll be there in minutes?
Yeah, and maybe tens of minutes, because again, we cover 1,200 square miles of Laramie County. It's 26 miles between two of our stations right now. And with this proposal, that station, that 26-mile closest station, is going to actually be taken offline and be more of a traditional pager response. So the main body of our responders are actually 7 more miles away, so 33 miles potentially away from the next closest resource coming to that. And as anybody could understand, if it's a grass fire or a structure fire or a cardiac arrest, that's not realistic to be able to provide service. We're coming in a recovery mode instead of a attack rescue mode.
So the chief and I, we're not against property tax reform. We support it. What is really just, I think it's stupid, is the fact that the property taxes completely fund county government and fire departments, and the state remains whole. So the state does not see any revenue off of property tax. So what we're kind of recommending is, let's redistribute the revenue sources the state gets and property tax. Let's fix the whole system so it's equally distributed, and make sure your first responder agencies aren't hit as hard as this initiative does. So that's what we're asking for. For example, the state at the same time is increasing their budget over $100 million, and over 35 positions is what they're asking for. And at the same time, they're asking first responders to cut their resources. It just doesn't make sense. You know, you would think the state legislature should look at their own house first and where they can save money and do their own cuts within their system. Before, they're kind of like bullies, right? In elementary school, they're taking our milk money. It's what they're doing.
I think to build on that, Sheriff's Executive, we don't oppose reform of the tax system. What we believe, or what I believe, is that this is local issues. These are local things. We should be asking our local taxpayers, do they support emergency services? They should be the ones that are having a voice in this. And the sheriff's exactly right. State legislature's not changing the state budget. They're increasing budget in certain areas, but they're imposing these burdens on local, county, and municipalities without actually truly looking at the impacts of it. It makes a great headline to say we cut property taxes 50%. But unless they look at the end result of that, how do they know what the impact is? And in this case, with special district fire districts and with law enforcement, it is a direct impact that our citizens will see. Now, babies aren't going to die. Criminals are still going to get caught. It's just going to take longer. It's not going to be able to provide all the services that our community's grown accustomed to. So let's reassess what's right for this community.
I think you guys bring up an interesting point with not being necessarily against tax reform. There has been a lot of call out from the community to have some sort of burden alleviated around their own individual taxes. What I'm hearing you guys say is that you're looking for either a diversification of your income streams, so not relying on property taxes, so that we're not having, the individual consumer decide, well, do I want to pay less on my taxes, or do I want the fire department to show up to my house in a timely manner when it's on fire? Because that obviously is a choice I don't think anyone would want to make. Or like, in addition to diversifying your guys' streams of revenue from the legislature, are there other amendments to the bill or some sort of alternative that would alleviate the burden on you guys without necessarily putting the taxpayer on the hook?
That's a very good point. So one of the things I've heard out there is, let's maybe make the sales tax less, or maybe take the sales tax and distribute a portion of that to county government as well, a higher proportion. So it's more balanced in the way the revenue is dispersed.
Redistributing the taxes is one thing. We don't get sales tax. The county fire districts do accrue a fifth penny sales tax in a very small amount that's distributed between all of the districts. The way we're funded, having some sort of compensation from the state would be beneficial. Recognizing that the state has coffers full of money, they have reserves. That's great, but that's taxpayer dollars. It should be redistributed back to the taxpayers. And instead what they're doing is saying, hey, let us keep our reserves, so let me keep my piggy bank full, and we're just going to cut taxpayer dollars, and then that's going to impact the local emergency responders. That's not fair to us. So there has to be some solution with that to make that more equitable for all involved. You take some of the smaller fire districts in the county that operate on an $80,000 budget. Their fuel costs are $20,000 to $30,000 a year because of the price of diesel today. So when they respond to something, there's a direct financial impact on the service that they can provide. If $80,000 and $20,000 goes to fuel and $10,000 goes to insurance, and all of a sudden you're up to 50% of their budget gone, there's no money left for them to buy new equipment. Today with inflation, a brand new fire truck is $1.1 million. 15 years ago, that was a $385,000 purchase. So just inflation alone hasn't kept up with our taxes. And we're doing the best we can. We balance those taxes just like the sheriff does with grants. So we take and invest into grant programs so that we can fund training and other opportunities. Without having matching funds for those grants, we can't accept the grants now, because now I don't have the 25% match that's many times needed for the federal grants.
I think another thing to consider is the fact that this is only a 2-year tax cut. I think we all know that this is not going to last 2 years. When the 2 years is up, what politician is going to say we're going to put your tax 100% back to where it was? It's not going to happen. They're going to keep this. So let's be realistic about this, and maybe let's start out in a smaller increment. Let's do a 10%, 15% tax cut permanently, that all the county governments know that this is something we have to live with, and tighten our belts up. So, to go out there and say that I have to lay off 35 people and then in 2 years try to get these people back again, it's going to be impossible, because we're going to have a reputation that our state does not take care of our employees. No one's going to want to come to Wyoming and work after this has taken place.
You asked about additional funding. There's future legislation coming down the line that's called backfill money. And the irony of that is that backfill money is going to be generated out of state revenues that counties are going to be able to apply through for a grant. Although we appreciate the thought that someone's trying to recoup some of the revenue lost, think about the costs associated with now having to have grant writers that produce the grant, people to review it, and all the layers of bureaucracy that are now added to this simple process that, hey, let's press pause on doing something so catastrophic and rethink it. And then the final part of it is, emergency services are community services that you don't need them until you need them. And you might not be thinking about it until you have that event. And when you have that event, you're going to wish you had 100 times more what you had. We're asking our taxpayers to contact their legislatures to say, hey, we want property tax cuts. We want reform there to be more feasible and economical for our constituents. But what we don't want to lose is the ability to have quality law enforcement, quality fire service, quality EMS in our communities, because when you dial 911, the expectation is that a quality, well-trained individual comes in a timely manner. And this is going to impact both of those pieces between training and response times.
Yeah, Chief, that's a good point. The one of the things I want to bring up, too, is I only had one legislator reach out to me to ask, how is this going to impact your agency? One. That's it. So when you look at the bill, all they did was slash it 50%. There was no consideration about the results, what's going to happen. And so we're asking our legislators, let's spend a little bit more time and do a good job. Do some reasonable, good sense tax cutting to make sure that we have our services are protected, our emergency services, and we have a long-lasting reform that the homeowner is really going to benefit from into the future as well.
I think that pretty well sums up your guys' position. And my last question for you is, in kind of monitoring your social media posts and engagement from the community, you guys have been accused of being pulled out to kind of fearmonger, that every time that we talk about property taxes and cutting them, out comes your local law enforcement to say, hey, it's a pretty proportional cut every time we cut property taxes to what happens to your local services. I'm curious, what is your response to being accused of fear-mongering?
So it's not fear-mongering, it's being honest. It's telling the community what is going to happen. So you're not surprised when it happens, because if I didn't say anything and all of a sudden these tax cuts come down and I got to lay people off and cut programs, then the community is going to be screaming, why didn't you tell us? We should have known. And so that's what I'm doing, is letting people know. I'm also letting the employees know too, so that they're not surprised as well, and just letting people know this is what's going to happen. And so if you don't want this to happen, then make sure you talk to your legislators. But at the end of the day, I get my authority, I get my direction from the politicians, the elected officials. And if they're representing the community and the community wants these services cut, then that's what I'll do.
Yeah, I agree to the sentiment of the sheriff. I look at it as that we're public servants. We're here for the public. If this is what the public wants and they want to reduce those services, then that's what it is. But it is our job to educate them. We don't believe, or I myself personally don't believe, that the legislators did their homework to understand what those impacts would be on public safety. So we tell everybody, go look at the numbers yourself. Pull up your tax statement. Look at what goes to the local fire department. Look at what goes to schools. What goes to, and what you'll recognize is that the fire service in this case is one of the lowest ones on your tax revenue. And then it's our job to say, okay, what do you get for that tax dollar? You get an engine company on scene within X number of minutes to be able to provide service. And with those cuts, it's going to impact that ability to do that. And so, like we've said from the beginning, babies aren't going to die. Crime's not going to go unattended. We're still going to respond to those things. It's just going to take us longer to do, and the impact of them is going to be greater because of that length of time that has to happen because of the cuts. So,
I have a question for you, Chief. What about insurance rates? Do you think that could be impacted?
We're already seeing parts of our county where the insurance rates are considered unprotected. We're also hearing from constituents where they are getting dropped from their insurance carrier because they live in a wildland urban interface threat area. Those are all going to multiply as the resources get pulled back into one central location and not equally distributed. The way the insurance industry is, if you're more than 5 miles from a fire station, you're unprotected. Now that we go to unstaffed stations, those become non-operating areas. It's going to impact your insurance. Take a look at what's happening in LA. Now, none of us applaud what's happened in LA, but they had significant cuts in their emergency services, and specifically LA City Fire, where they had hundreds of apparatus out of service because of budget cuts. That's the same proportion that happens here now as we cut and have to take equipment out of service and limit the capabilities of response. Catastrophically, those things multiply. As we approach to the 1-year anniversary of the Dusty Road Fire, which was the fire that happened out on the western side of Laramie County between Happy Jack and Horse Creek last year, March 1st, that event was able to have limited damage to property owners' homes, significant damage to ranch land, but a little bit of damage. We could have lost 500 homes from that fire. But because of the fact that we were able to put 20 apparatus in the first 25 minutes, because of the fact that we had mutual aid partners that were able to come because they had the funding and staffing to be able to be there, we were able to limit that risk. These cuts impact that.
And those, just to clarify for listeners, those mutual aid partners are other fire districts in the state, so they're also being impacted, correct?
Yeah, and in Laramie County. So broader than just Laramie County Fire Authority, all of the districts run on a shoestring budget right now. And because of that, they're going to have to limit what they provide their members to be active, how they train, and what resources they're going to be able to allocate to come into somebody else's area. It's going to cut down on mutual aid. It's going to cut down on response. It's going to cut down on all those things because they can't afford the fuel to fill the truck up when they get back to the station. So a lot of spaghetti feeds and pancake feeds are going to start popping up just to pay for fuel for fire trucks.
Well, thank you both so much for appearing on this podcast. We really appreciate it. Again, that was Sheriff Brian Kozak and Fire Chief Jason Caughey. Senate File 69 has been placed on general file in the House and has yet to pass. Those that are interested in advocating to their legislators, their emails can be found on the Laramie County Sheriff's Office Facebook. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'm here with Taylor Staples, our arts and entertainment reporter, to bring us a roundup of some of the upcoming events in the area this week.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. So for today, the Cheyenne Guitar Society is hosting a Valentine's Day dinner and concert at the library at 6 p.m. Also at 6 p.m., there is a Willow Heart workshop at the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. And then also today, CLTP is opening up their Sondheim on Sondheim show at 7:30 at the Mary Godfrey Playhouse. On Saturday, February 15th, there is a Winter Farmers Market at the Cheyenne Depot starting at 9. Then there's winter nights all day from 10 a.m. to 6 at the Event Center at Archer. Then the Cheyenne Audubon field trip is going to Tie City Trailhead starting at 1 p.m., meeting at Lions Park. And then CLTP has another show at 7:30 for Sondheim and Sondheim. Then on Sunday, February 16th, Winter Nights is again all day from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Event Center at Archer. Then there's a wood sign workshop from 1 to 3 at Cats and Coffee Connections. And then finally, another show of Sondheim and Sondheim at 2 p.m. On Tuesday, February 18th, there is a collage workshop at the Cheyenne Creativity Center from 5:30 to 7:30. And the Cheyenne Audubon program with Chris Madsen, called From the Grass Up, is at 6:30 p.m. at the library. On Wednesday, February 19th, there is chair yoga and poetry from 11 to 11:40 a.m. at the library. Also, there is a inner compulsion embroidery workshop and reception at Laramie County Community College at 10 a.m. And finally, there is open studio at the Cheyenne Creativity Center at 5:30. And then finally, on Thursday, February 20th, there is an indoor giant tic-tac-toe event at the library from 3 to 6. You can also read to a therapy dog from 4 to 5 at the library. And then finally, there is a wine tasting at the Cheyenne Frontier Days Old West Museum from 6 to 8.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate you bringing that for us this week. And before we close out today's episode, I'll bring you a quick recap of some of our news that we've published in the past week. A Cheyenne man was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison Monday after he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Antonio Navarrete, who's 23, was initially charged with first-degree murder and aggravated assault and battery last March following the fatal shooting of 25-year-old Cortavius Williams in South Cheyenne. He later pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. There is a $109 million spending difference between the two supplemental budgets passed in each legislative chamber last week. As the Joint Conference Committee gets ready to meet and work on a unified budget, there are three major areas of negotiation on the table. These include how much the state spends on wildfire fire grants, the conditions and dollar amounts to backfill local governments for lost property tax revenue, and whether the state will claw back unspent energy matching funds from the governor's office. And finally, after a half hour of heated debate among representatives, the House Judiciary Committee voted February 7th to table House Bill 194 titled Obscenity Amendments and study the issue before considering it again during the 2026 budget session. This bill would have created penalties for any person who knowingly promotes obscenities to minors and would have repealed exemptions for activities conducted in the course of employment at a school, college, university, museum, or public library. That is all for this week's episode of The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. Thank you for tuning in this week, and be sure to check back in next Friday for more.